Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time can be considered as one of the greatest video games ever made. Released all the way back in 2003, it received critical acclaim, winning multiple awards, while easily holding its own against giants like the first Call of Duty, Max Payne 2, the first Splinter Cell, and Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, to name a few. Initially, Sands of Time serves as a reboot for the original side-scroller Prince of Persia from 1989, which had its own sequel in 1993, and the first 3D adaptation in 1999. And even though I do have some history with those games, I won't be covering them in this video. My first experience with the Sands of Time was in 2004, when I went to the local video game store to get something new. There was a PlayStation 2 setup where you could try out certain games, and Sands of Time was one of them. I noticed on the shelves that the game had a platinum cover, which meant that it had to be really good. So I gave it a shot, and after playing this for a couple of minutes, my jaw dropped. What's ironic though is that in the 90s, when I played the first Prince of Persia on my family's MS-DOS computer, I thought the game was slow and boring as shit, mostly because of the slow, realistic animations. Yeah, quality animation was not something that the 7-year-old me would ever give a shit about. But with Sands of Time, I was mostly sold because of the animation quality. Everything I got to do in this game looked cool and felt really good to do. Every fluid jump, attack, wall run, and so on. Not to mention the fact that you can control time in this game, which is always awesome. And so, about 15 minutes later, I was home playing this non-stop on my own PlayStation 2, and I still got the copy right here. So it's been about 2 years since my last review, and a couple of weeks ago I wanted to play the Sands of Time trilogy again. While playing the first game, I started forming all of these opinions in my head, and suddenly for some reason I felt like I want to do this again, and kinda like document this journey with these upcoming videos. So with that said, let's talk about Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. In Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, you play as, well, the Prince of Persia. I'd love to give the name of the main character, but the game never addresses that, which is kind of unnecessary since it gives no value to the storytelling aspect, so the only thing that the player is left with is the prince. The story begins with the prince and his father, King Shahraman, attacking the Maharaja's palace in India with an army. Unfortunately, the apparent reason for this attack is rather simplistic. The prince basically sums it up with just one sentence.
With a promise of honor and glory, tempted my father into a grievous error.
Yeah, just honor and glory. Whatever. But soon enough we can connect the dots that this attack is mostly conjured up by the game's main villain, the Vizier, who used to work for the Maharaja before he betrayed him. In exchange for his betrayal, the Vizier wants to claim an item from the Maharaja's treasure vault. So that makes a lot more sense. I just wish there was more context given to us on this attack. How exactly did the Vizier convince the King of Persia into actually doing this?
It doesn't matter.
So in hopes of bringing honor and glory to his father, the prince wants to be the first one to find the treasure vault. The game begins, and one of the first things you'll notice is that there's a narration going on, which gives the player the indication that the events of the game are taking place in a flashback. But I'll come back to the narration part at the end of this section.
Do you think I felt regret as I gazed upon the destruction we had wrought?
The prince makes it to the treasure vault, where he finds a special dagger. He also discovers that the dagger has the unusual ability of reversing time, and obviously that's the item that the Vizier wants.
That dagger.
The king denies the Vizier's request, letting the prince keep the dagger as a souvenir of his first battle, and Shahraman also claims another item that the Vizier wants, which is this giant hourglass. Now that really pisses him off, and I think it's hilarious. The game doesn't even try to hide the fact that he's the main bad guy. But that's not a problem. The problem is this.
I want no animals or maidens harmed until I have chosen. Let it be known, King Shahraman is merciful in victory.
I want no animals or maidens harmed until I have chosen. King Sharaman is merciful. So, fighting for honor and glory but using the help of a traitor to do so while killing the ruler and capturing his daughter, including other women as slaves? Did someone else's bullshit detector go off? That's why, in my opinion, this battle needs more context or a better reason behind it than simply honor and glory. Because in this direction, the character of the king is an asshole, which would be okay, but this will cause certain issues in the plot later and even in the third game. But we'll talk about the third game once we finally get there. So the prince and the army make their way to the Sultan's palace in Azad, where Shahraman presents the hourglass as a gift to the Sultan.
Why does it glow?
Using everyone's ignorance against them, the vizier tricks the prince into opening the hourglass, which can only be done with the Dagger of Time. The captured slave Farah tries to stop this but falls too late, and so the prince unleashes the sands of time, which begin turning people into sand creatures, including the prince's father.
I have brought us honor and glory.
We can also see that the vizier can somehow control the sands through some spells that he speaks in a foreign language. Now the vizier tries to get the dagger again, but the prince escapes and now he's gotta fight. But first, I should probably cover the reason why the main characters are not transformed by the sands of time, because the game does a really shitty job in explaining that.
You're right.
Now, the game's manual says that these characters are protected by 3 artifacts. In the prince's case, it's the Dagger of Time, which makes sense, and we see constantly what it can do. The vizier has the staff, and again, we can see what some of the staff's capabilities are. He can summon clones, put himself in a protective bubble, summon sandstorms, and even control the sand creatures. However, in Farah's case, the manual shows that the protective artifact is her bow. Yeah, she does use a bow in combat, but we're talking about what protects her from turning into a sand monkey.
Very funny.
The game implies that the protective item is actually the medallion she wears, so what the shit is this? Did they print this out before finishing the story? And secondly, why am I reading about the protective qualities of these items in the game's fucking manual? From my point of view, all of this should be explained in the game, no excuses. We get very subtle hints about the medallion, and the game makes no effort in showing us what this thing can even do. And no, the prince using the medallion in the second game does not count here as an explanation.
Kill him.
So one of those hints is this. Just a quick glimpse like that. And the other example is towards the end when Farah leaves her medallion behind for the prince, which indicates that she knew about its protective abilities. But there's no way the prince could have known about that in the beginning, so what's missing is that logical piece of dialogue. Gee, Farah, how come you're not affected by the sands of time? Followed by an explanation. God damn it.
Alright.
Anyway, after learning how to kill the sand creatures, the prince encounters the first sand vortex, which gives him small visions of the future. There's multiple instances of these scattered throughout the game, and the visions are not just about gameplay segments or cutscenes. In some visions you will actually see the prince die, so it's up to you to stop those mistakes from happening, and I truly think that's brilliant. So the prince wakes up and sees Farah running away from him, which is ridiculous. She runs away, and then confronts the prince herself. Okay. Farah blames the prince with all that's happening and wants the dagger to fix this, but the prince doesn't trust her. They get attacked and separated. On the way back to Farah, the prince witnesses a bunch of vultures carrying the hourglass somewhere else and meets the annoying unnamed guard of Azad who's trying to activate the palace's defenses.
Make sure you pick them up in the right order!
How did he survive this long? No idea, and I guess it doesn't matter much, because as soon as the prince activates the system, the plot doesn't need this character anymore, so obviously he dies, but it's done in such a lazy-ass way. You look over and you can see that there's a sand creature there, but the scream is still going on. So did the guard turn into the creature, or did the creature teleport behind him, which they can do, and knock him over the ledge? No fucking idea.
Stop wasting time!
Eventually the prince makes it back to Farah, who's under attack from the sand people, and sees what has become of his father. Considering the king's recent actions, this gets no sympathy from me.
Honor and glory.
The prince absorbs the king with the dagger and uses the sand vortex, where he sees a vision of the vizier taking the hourglass to the top of the palace. Farah asks for the prince's help to find the hourglass, to which the prince replies,
It is in the Sultan's treasure vault, atop the Tower of Dawn.
How do you know that?
That, detective, is the right question.
yes. Even though the prince's answer is a bit cliché, at least there was a logical question asked.
I just know.
So the prince and Farah team up and the journey to the hourglass begins. From this point, the story mostly focuses on the character development of the prince and the relationship between the prince and Farah. When they fight together, solve puzzles together, and whenever Farah can't follow, there's always a conveniently placed crack in the environment.
Look, a crack! Look, a crack! There's another crack!
Can't you crawl through a crack or something?
Look, a crack!
All right, you can take the crack.
It looks to me like the best part of you ran down the crack of your mama's ass and ended up as a brown stain on the mattress.
During this journey, there's like 2 extra things that I would have wanted to see. First of all, I wish that the plot would have used the rewind feature just a little bit more. For example, this moment.
Do you think I can jump it?
Go on, try. What's the worst that can happen?
As a kid, I actually thought that Farah is gonna fall and break a leg or die or something, and then you would have to rewind the time and then the prince would instruct her to do something differently, which would have been cool. And the second thing are the prince's visions of the future. At some point he sees Farah taking the dagger, and in one of the cutscenes he wakes up upset because of it, which is exactly the reaction that I needed to see, but he never takes any precautions to stop that from happening, and they never talk about the visions, which is kinda disappointing. But at least the relationship development is done pretty well.
She would have left me there to die.
Finally our heroes make it to the hourglass, but the vizier shows up as well and summons a sandstorm, sending them both flying all the way back down to a tomb. Now even though the tomb section isn't anything special action-wise, it's an important part of the story that works on humanizing the characters more. The prince begins to take responsibility for his actions. We find out that he's a bit claustrophobic, and we also learn about Farah's secret word that her mother told her when she was a child, which is supposed to open a magic doorway or something whenever she feels scared or alone. The word is Kakulukiam, and remember this, it's gonna be important in the end.
It's the most childish thing I've ever heard of.
So the prince says the word and a doorway actually opens, which leads to the strangest part in the entire game. Farah disappears, you have to run down a ridiculously long set of stairs, which is completely unnecessary. You get to some kind of a bathhouse where Farah is just talking nonsense.
Why do you act so distant? Shall we take a bath? Take me in your arms. Just take me in your arms.
And when the prince finally finds her, they don't even talk about the weird shit that just happened. Instead, they swim in a pool and go on to have sex.
Nice. Nice.
What? No, you don't understand it.
You sure they've had sex?
Yeah,
Has she performed oral sex on him?
I think so.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
In the next moment, the prince wakes up still in the tomb, which I guess means that this was a dream sequence. Even the prince doesn't know exactly what the fuck just happened. Anyway, just like the visions showed him, Farah took the dagger and left her medallion behind. The prince quickly gives chase, climbs the tower and catches up, only to see her being overwhelmed by the sand guards. She gets knocked over and ultimately falls to her death.
Farah, no!
There's this much needed logical moment how the prince tries to rewind the time, but Farah had used up all the sand in the dagger. After killing the sand guards, the prince is devastated from Farah's death, and take note how the prince sets the medallion next to her and never picks it up. It's also gonna be important later. So the vizier offers the prince immortality if he gives him the dagger, but he refuses and climbs to the top of the hourglass. And of course, now of all the moments, the vizier does nothing to stop him. I mean, summoned sandstorms before, but well, maybe he's tired or something. I don't know. The prince initiates the infamous Grand Rewind, which brings the time back to the point before the Persians attacked the Maharaja's palace. He wakes up still holding the dagger and immediately rushes off, and now certain things start making sense. Throughout the entire game, when the prince is narrating, he's actually telling the story to Farah, warning her about the vizier's betrayal. Since she died before the Grand Rewind, she has no memories of anything that transpired. Or will transpire. So the game is kinda like a flashback / flash forward, and at the moment, I don't think I've ever seen it done like this before. The Grand Rewind is a risky but an amazing twist in my opinion. In the morning, the vizier fights the prince for the first and last time, obviously losing the fight. The prince gives the dagger back to Farah, and we also get this amusing interaction.
I said I owe you thanks. You presume too much. Such a fantastic story.
Now that's a good example of what I said before, how I wish the plot would have had at least a couple more of these rewind moments. So before I get to the conclusion, there's 2 inconsistencies that I need to get off my chest with the ending. First one is Farah's medallion again. Remember when the prince set it next to her body and never picked it up before the Grand Rewind, but Farah is still wearing the medallion in the end? Well, I've read it somewhere that apparently the developers made a mistake with this. She wasn't actually supposed to wear the medallion in the ending section, which makes sense because she didn't have any physical physical contact with the object before the rewind.
What are you talking about?
The second inconsistency from my point of view is this.
Wait. I don't even know your name.
Just call me Kakolukia.
Okay, I'll admit that it's a cool way to end the game, but the prince was telling about the events that happened, or will happen, all night long. So did he leave some details out of it? Why would he not talk about the secret word that only Farah would know? Isn't that like a good convincing point? Think about it like this. In the movie Back to the Future, when Marty goes back into the past, he needs Doc Brown's help to get back to the future, but at first the Doc thinks he's crazy, so Marty tells him something that only the Doc would know, which convinces him.
Great Scott!
But I guess in this game's case, there might not have been much reason to convince Farah that all of this was true, since everything worked out well in the end.
My lady, he came here to abduct you.
Another thing that has been praised by people are the prince's comments when he dies in the game, or you save the game, or you want to quit the game.
No, that didn't happen either. Let me begin again. Done. I'll start the story from here next time.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but from a logical standpoint, isn't it kinda dumb as well? I mean, he's telling the story, and when something goes wrong, then what? He forgets that he actually didn't die there?
No, that didn't happen either. Let me begin again.
But you know, by now I'm most likely overthinking it way too much, so let's just finish this section.
No permanent damage, thank you.
In conclusion, for me the plot is nowhere near as excellent as some people have said. For my standards, it's slightly above average. A lot of questions that should have been asked are never asked. Actions that should have been done are never done, and some of the most important details that should have been explained are never explained. Proper backstory on the artifacts and our beloved characters, what is the purpose of the Sands of Time, tell us more about the main villain, I mean he's barely in the game, but it's the first game. So let's be fair.
Truly you must think I'm a fool.
It might sound like I'm giving the plot a hard time, but it's still a decent story. With all the bad parts, it also has a lot of good ones. The strongest is the prince's character development. You can truly see and feel how he changes from a cocky bastard to a more compassionate, likable soul, and it's done really well. Definitely worth experiencing. The same can be said for the relationship between the prince and Farah. They argue, bicker, have trust issues, but ultimately they do grow closer together, and the narrative doesn't always focus on the mission, it also works on humanizing the characters, so it hits you even more when the relationship build-up is taken away from us.
But why did you invent such a fantastic story?
There's a lot of risks in the storyline, and thankfully in the end it pays off. The grand rewind basically erasing everything that took place in the game, the narration twist, and the visions are absolutely brilliant stuff, so props to the developers for taking these bold steps. Now finally, let's check out some gameplay.
Stop talking to yourself!
Down in its core, Sands of Time is a third-person action puzzle platformer that also introduces powers to control time to a certain extent. So you can basically divide the gameplay into 3 different elements. Either you're getting from point A to B, fighting, or solving puzzles, and sometimes the game combines the elements as well, but let's look at these elements individually, starting with platforming. In my honest opinion, platforming is the absolute best part of the entire game. I tried really hard to find bad things about it, but all I found were very minor issues that I saw once, maybe twice, max, on my 2 recent playthroughs.
Oh, thank God!
The prince can obviously jump, vault, catch ledges, wall run horizontally, wall run vertically, balance on beams, climb columns, swing from poles, swing from ropes, do tic-tac jumps to reach higher ground, and of course, shimmy on ledges.
Shimmy, shimmy, y'all, shimmy, yeah, shimmy, yeah. Give me the mic so I can take it away. Off on the natural charge, bon voyage. Yeah, from the home of the Dodger Brooklyn squad.
Anyway, the only issues that I had was a landing detection inconsistency in this part. You can see that the prince kinda does land on the beam but slides off. That could have easily been my own mistake though. The other thing is that the game uses fixed camera angles sometimes, so if the angle changes drastically it might throw you off a bit, and I guess the wall run positioning might be too precise. But to me, those are small problems, because as I said, those happen once or twice only. I guess for hardcore gamers, the main problem might be the lack of challenge, but there's definitely people who have or will struggle with the platforming.
It's quite natural, really.
For extra challenge, sometimes you have to fight sand vultures, or those annoying bats. The vultures die pretty much with 1 or 2 hits, and with the bats you just gotta let them get close, swing your sword, and reduce their numbers down to 3, and then those sons of bitches fly away. Which for me was not really a challenge, but more of an annoyance, especially during the end when the game keeps sending those fuckers at you over and over again. But better challenge is when you have to move through the environment on a timer and keep the flow going, either because the surfaces are crumbling beneath you, or you have to maneuver through a series of different deadly traps to get through a closing door, which can lead to some pretty tense moments. Shit. Oh, thank God. Now, if I'd had to rate the platforming element on its own, then it's a solid 9 out of 10. Damn good. This shit right here was ahead of its time. I honestly can't believe how well the platforming still holds up. I hadn't played this game for more than 10 years, and I still had so much fun with this element. It might not be the most difficult platforming you have encountered or will encounter, at least for me it wasn't even as a kid. The game still puts in proper effort to spice things up though, by having very small combat sections, moving quickly on time, or mixing it up with puzzle solving, which brings me to the next element, puzzles. In the sense of being a puzzle platformer, the puzzles in Sands of Time are not all just about solving combinations while being mostly stationary. It's about understanding where you need to go and how you're gonna get there using switches, levers, movable objects, and of course, platforming mechanics. One of the examples when puzzle platforming comes to life is in the underground cistern, where you have to utilize climbing features, jumping, swinging from ropes, levers, and a movable object. Other times, it's a lot simpler, where you just have to find your way using only platforming. So even though the game is very linear, there are certain sections where you have to explore and see what's what.
I can see that!
Personally, I never use these, but the game has an option to switch to first-person camera or landscape camera, which can help you make sense of the environment. But yeah, even as a kid, I pretty much never used these. In fact, I recorded these clips just for the sake of the video. But hey, I'm not gonna complain about the game having extra features.
Your exertions are most amusing.
Getting back to the topic, I wouldn't say that the puzzles are difficult. They're definitely good, a nice change of pace, and it's another element of the game that holds up ridiculously well. And for a 2003-year game, it's nice to have a companion character that sometimes helps you along. I'm instantly getting Uncharted vibes when playing this. But wait a minute, does she really help you solve puzzles? She's definitely useful in combat, but when you think about it, in puzzle sections, Farah is just a scripted companion character. All she does is wait for you to make your move, and once certain conditions are met, then she makes hers, which advances the puzzle. You can't give her commands and she can never make a mistake. What's also missing for me is the fact that she's never in any danger during the puzzle sections. There's not a single moment where you have to solve a combination really fast to get to her to, I don't know, save her from getting impaled by slow-moving spikes or something.
This isn't that kind of game.
Yeah, a bit cliche, but moments like these are a good kick in the ass to wake you up and make you think faster, creating tension. But then again, this might have made the character look like a damsel in distress, so it's a mixed bag. Well, fuck, if you want to put her in danger, you can always beat the shit out of her yourself. Then rewind time and do it again. In the end, the puzzles are still good and absolutely worth trying out. But on the side, there's one specific puzzle I gotta talk about, the bathhouse. I have to defend this one since I've read and heard people saying that this puzzle has no rhyme or reason, it's trial and error, blah blah blah. I just want to make this clear that this puzzle has a very simple solution. No, you don't have to try the doorways one by one and remember them, you just have to pay attention, and that's all I'm gonna say. Now before I can get to the final gameplay element, I gotta cover the powers first. By wielding the Dagger of Time, the prince gets access to 5 different powers, one of them being the power of destiny, visions of the future. But this isn't really about gameplay, it's more about storytelling, so not much to say about that in this section, other than you also use a sand vortex to save your progress.
Done. I'll start the story from here next time.
My favorite power, and the most famous one, is Revival, aka Rewinding Time. The power that gives you the possibility of undoing your mistakes. It's genius. However, it also makes the game a lot more easier. If a certain approach isn't working with the enemies, or you get your timing wrong while avoiding traps, then you can just try again immediately. But if you get too comfortable with Rewinding Time, then after Farah takes the dagger away, you're not gonna be able to do that in the final section of the game, and I really like this change. It makes the final platforming segments a lot more tense.
No, that didn't happen either. Let me begin again.
The next power is delay, or slow motion. It's self-explanatory. The only thing that bothers me a bit is that slow motion also affects the prince, which is kinda weird, but not a big deal. Considering the simple nature of this game, overall, I don't think I ever used this power during my sessions. Just like with the camera view footage, I recorded this only for the sake of the video.
Do you think me a child, that I would believe such nonsense?
Then we have restraint, or freeze. This is only for combat. It's definitely useful and it works by stabbing enemies with the dagger. This will freeze the enemy in one spot and the prince can do follow-up attacks to dispatch of the creatures more quickly. The final power is haste, also known as mega freeze. It's another one for combat only. It stops time around the prince, which lets him move instantly between enemies, taking them out extremely fast, and it's very useful. But using the powers also comes with a cost, so we gotta pay attention to the interface. In the top left corner, we got the health bar. Should you lose health, you can always get it back by drinking water from pretty much any source you can find. The prince doesn't care, even if he stands in it.
Yummy!
In the course of your playthrough, you can upgrade the health bar as well by paying attention in the environment. Sometimes, behind weak-looking walls lies whatever this place is where you can increase your health bar. Good feature, but from the story's perspective, makes no sense. The game drops you into like another dimension and doesn't explain anything. But the prince does make comments about this, so we got that going at least.
Hello? Is anyone there? I have a feeling I'm not in Azad anymore.
And I just love how the animation looks like he's about to puke first, and then it looks like he's tripping balls.
I was gonna clean my room until I got high. I was gonna get up and...
Now, when you use rewind, slow motion, or the mega freeze, then under the health bar is a time circle, which is 10 seconds. These yellow balls are sand tanks, which are consumed by using rewind. Those little bananas are called power tanks. These are consumed by using restraint, slow motion, or the mega freeze, and refilling the dagger is mostly done by absorbing enemies. You can upgrade your sand tanks by retrieving sand clouds that you can find all around the palace. Collecting 8 sand clouds means you get a new sand tank, and absorbing 16 enemies gives you a new power tank. Should both of your tanks be depleted, then collect a sand cloud and it's gonna refill everything, and 10 is the max amount of tanks that you can upgrade to. So, nothing difficult about this.
Easy for you to say.
Couple of things to keep in mind though. First of all, creating a new power tank always depends on having an additional sand tank first. If you don't have that, then absorptions will not start building up the next power tank. Secondly, when considering the powers, my main bone to pick is only with the Mega Freeze, but not because of the ability itself or how much sand it uses from the dagger. My problem is that the Mega Freeze requires for both of these sources to be equally full. Let's say your sand tanks are empty, but power tanks are full. In that case, the ability will not work, which is kinda ridiculous because when you use this skill, it only consumes the power tanks, leaving the sand tanks unchanged. But now, let's say you have 7 sand tanks and 6 power tanks, but both of them are full. In that case, the ability will not work again, because remember I said that they have to be equally full. Fucking hell. Anyway, I hope all of this made sense. I tried to explain it as best I could, and the powers are a lot of fun. But now, let's talk about the shittiest gameplay element, combat. You can praise this game all you want, but it's never gonna save this piece of shit combat. Okay, actually, it's not the core combat system's fault why it sucks, so let's break it down. You got 2 weapons, the sword and the dagger. Since I already explained what the dagger can do, I won't be talking about it much in this section. Anyhow, you got your basic attacks with the sword. You can dodge by rolling or flipping away, which looks awesome, and obviously you can block. What's cool about this is that if you get knocked down, you can block while laying on the ground as well. You can do counterattacks, leap over enemies, beat them down, or use rebound attacks from the wall. But one of the more interesting features is what the manual calls multi-enemy combat.
What?
When you get into a fight, the prince can easily attack between enemies from different angles. All you have to do is push the movement in the direction of the enemy and hit the attack button. This system is like an ancestor to the free flow combat that we've seen in Batman Arkham games, and it works pretty well. Now, counterattacking for me is a hit and a miss. You can do 2 types of counters, one with the sword, one with the dagger. When you're blocking, you have to hit the sword or dagger button as soon as the enemy's weapon makes contact with yours. It's a good addition for the combat system, but for my taste, the timing is way too precise. Nothing impossible, but honestly, you can find better ways to dispatch of the enemies more quickly than waiting for these slow fuckers to attack you. So at some point, I just forgot about countering completely. It was time consuming and annoying to pull off. But in this case, we can easily use the good old I suck at this argument.
Surely you do not believe him.
Just like with counterattacks, you have similar options with leaping attacks. Keep in mind though that you can't leap normally over the enemies in blue uniforms, they'll knock you back. What you can do is leap over them by using the wall rebound, which works adequately. You can take the prince out of the combat stance by putting his weapons away with the press of a button. This will allow you to move around without being locked onto an enemy, so if you need more health, you can always go looking for a water source, grab a quick drink, and then get back to fighting. Or if Farah needs help, you can sometimes get to her faster this way.
Pay attention. Can't spend all day chasing after you.
Now, in the case of Farah, there's people who find her annoying and people who like her in combat situations. For the most part, I think she's useful, but what sucks about her is that she doesn't move around much, or sometimes at all. There was a couple of moments when Farah was about to die. I quickly went to save her, but we ended up getting surrounded, so as I was trying to get them off of us, I kept hitting her by accident and I ended up killing this stupid asshole a couple of times because she doesn't fucking move. She can squeeze through every single ass crack in the environment but can't move around the enemies a bit? Come on. But still, I do think she helps, and having to look after her, it also adds to the challenge. So now, with all the basics covered, it's time to explain what exactly turns the combat into a complete fuck show in this game. For me, there's 4 main parasites that work together against the combat, trying to make their shit smell good. Number 1, lack of variety. Considering all the stuff I just talked about, you might think, how is it possible that the combat has low variety? All the moves and powers you can use and still not enough? Unfortunately, yes, but the trouble with combat variety is mostly fueled by problem number 2, high enemy numbers. Holy shit. There's too many enemies in this game. The fights drag on and on to the point where the combat starts feeling like a goddamn chore. I've asked this question in different games before, and I'll ask it again. Why is it necessary to have so many fucking enemies? Mostly, you're plowing through 15 to 25 of these mother humpers per fight.
Careful. Don't tire yourself.
There's this elevator segment where I think I killed 27 if I count it correctly, and I never want to play this bullshit ever again in my life. So using the Mega Freeze is mandatory if you want to keep your sanity. Which brings me to problem number 3, dagger absorption. In case you can't use Freeze or the Mega Freeze, or you don't want to because you might be saving your sands for more critical situations, your only way of getting rid of the enemies is to absorb them with the dagger. If you knock an enemy down and don't retrieve the sands, it's just gonna get back up again. What annoys the shit out of me is that while they're rising from the ground, you can't knock them back down again. There's some kind of a shield stopping you, which I find unnecessary, but what this means is that you're gonna be absorbing enemies over and over and over again, making this action repetitive beyond any reason. And here's some more bullshit. If you initiate the retrieval, then you can't cancel it or block from it, which can leave you wide open. And I also don't like that absorbing enemies resets the timer. Be very careful with this. I did die a couple of times because I had low health, absorbed an enemy, the timer reset, got attacked immediately after, and I could not rewind. But honestly, at the same time, there's also a bit of conflict within me.
There is no conflict.
It's actually a good idea. Retrieving sand from the enemies refills your tanks, right? So basically, this is the game telling you, hey, if you want to use the dagger, then you gotta work for it, bitch. Which is fine. But what ruins it is how repetitive it gets. And speaking of repetitive, here's problem number 4, lack of variety in enemy types. Again, it's strange to put this on the list because the game actually has multiple enemy types, each with their own attack combinations and weapons. There's vultures, bats, and scarabs as well, but they die really quickly and you don't have to absorb them, thank God. So not much point in talking about those.
You perceive my malady.
Because of the enemy numbers, the enemy types will also start feeling more of the same as you go further. But what about boss fights? They fucking suck as well. There's only 2 boss fights in the entire game. The prince's father, who's pretty much like those big sand guards with, I guess, more health, but the functioning is pretty much the same. Beat him down, absorb him, you're done.
That was not my father.
The second and final boss fight is the Vizier. Even though overall the fight is boring, at least it resembles more of an actual boss fight. He's gonna summon 3 clones, you gotta take him out one by one, and that's about it. Nothing difficult. On the side, I do have to show this part when you win. You uppercut the Vizier with the sword, this son of a bitch still gets up, says a few threatening words, and then just stands in one place. You can run around him, leap over him. I even went to see what Farah was doing. Also, cool detail, if you get close to Farah, then she will hide behind the pot. But what the fuck is this? And who the hell selected this location for the final boss fight? A bedroom? I don't care what the excuse is. Come on, it's a fucking bedroom.
You waste your breath.
I guess for me the main fuck up is in the enemy numbers. The way I see it, it could have been fixed by either removing the dagger absorption mechanic and making the enemies weaker, or reducing enemy numbers at least by half. I feel the balance would have been a lot better in that case, and maybe the boss fights wouldn't feel so boring as well.
I saw my father turn to sand.
In the beginning of the game, you are fighting human enemies. They go down very easily, and there's like 4 or 5 guys per fight. It's simple and the pacing is so much better, but it removes proper challenge. Once the sand creatures show up, I'll admit it, the combat is interesting at first, but as the game goes on, it gets really tedious. So if you have any brain cells left, you're gonna want to get through the combat sections as quickly as possible, which means your fighting style is most likely gonna look like this. Leap over, hit with the sword, retrieve, and use the Mega Freeze when you can. Rinse and repeat. And speaking of swords, you do get new and more powerful ones that help you break walls, but in the damage department, you're not gonna feel that much of a change, except when you get the final sword. This mean bastard will take out enemies in one shot, so the combat goes from easy to interesting to extremely repetitive to extremely easy. What's weird about this is that the final sword is like a breath of fresh air, something that I should not have liked, I ended up loving. It's the best thing that could have happened to redeem some of this bullshit that I had to go through. Also, get used to seeing this animation after almost every fight. You're gonna see this animation again and again and again. What's funny is that when the prince doesn't have the dagger, the animation still has the motion of putting the dagger away.
Excuse me.
Finally, AI. The enemies are slow and dumb. They can accidentally attack each other. They will politely wait for you to finish retrievals, unless you initiate it when an enemy is about to attack you. In that case, you can get hurt. I also love dicking around with the AI by just climbing a little bit higher during fights. Yeah, they don't know what to do then. Overall, it sucks, but when you consider the fact that these are mindless sand creatures, then it's actually pretty accurate. I'm not really sure which side to take here.
I did not understand the meaning of what I had just seen.
To sum it up, I'd say that platforming is absolutely the king. The prince can do some crazy acrobatics, except when benches and crates are in the way. This motherfucker can break the laws of physics but can't jump over this shit? Yeah, I'm just nitpicking here. So puzzles are the queen, and combat? Well, Combat is a fairly normal prince, but he was born after generations of incest.
What's that supposed to mean?
The saddest part is that the core combat system is actually decent. Yeah, I did have a couple of targeting issues with the sword. And sometimes the camera can get stuck, but it's responsive, it functions, and the moves are cool. Of course there's people who don't mind the enemy numbers, yet still I'm having trouble understanding how could anyone find fun in this. And I'm not gonna excuse it all by just saying that, well, it's an old game. Well, it's the first in the trilogy. I can do it to some extent, but from the moment where I stop having fun, that's where I draw the line. I didn't like the combat because of these details when I was a kid, and I still don't like it.
Where are they coming from?
One difference you're gonna notice with the camera controls is that instead of moving the camera up and down, you can only zoom in and out. Might feel a bit strange at first, but I wouldn't say that it's an issue. Didn't bother me at all. All I can say is that try to look past these problems with combat and divert your main focus to platforming and puzzles, because that's where the gameplay truly shines. Now let's talk about the presentation.
If you want to be useful, try finding a book that'll tell us how to get out of here.
Sands of Time is without any doubt a beautiful game in many different aspects, but of course not entirely perfect, because absolute perfection just doesn't exist. For a 2003 year game, it looks pretty damn good. I don't know how to properly phrase this, but when you look at this game, it has like a glare, something in the artistic design that gives it a certain vibe, which really fits with the tone of the game. I'm sorry if that doesn't make a lot of sense, I just can't find better words for this.
I have a simpler version.
It looks good in gameplay and cutscenes, but not that much in pre-rendered cutscenes. The cinematic scenes do have better lip sync, decent effects, and better character models, since in the gameplay the prince kinda looks like a blockhead, but the overall picture quality is kinda blurry and the animations are quite stiff. Overall, the cutscenes are fine. If there's anything that bothers me, is that you can't skip the cutscenes with gameplay graphics, since some of them are kind of pointless to watch. Move your fucking ass.
Thanks.
In the beginning of the video, I mentioned that what sold me this game as a kid were the in-game animations. They're so fluid, smooth, and clean. You can see that a lot of work was put into this, and it's top-notch. It's not always realistic, but hey, if you want realism, go play your fucking FIFAs or something.
Of course.
I also gotta mention the physics. For an old game, there's surprisingly a lot of detail. The poles where you swing from react to the prince's weight. Waterfalls react to the prince's character model. When shimmying on ledges, bits of dust fall down. Movement gets slower in deeper water. You can't wall run instantly after coming out of the water, because the prince's boots are slippery, and when you run down from an angle, movement gets faster, and when going back up, it gets slower. Not bad.
How inventive.
Another element that you can truly appreciate is the level design. Even though the game mostly takes place in one palace, there's so many different places you're gonna go through. Prison, library, baths, caves, a fucking zoo. The location variety is damn good. If there's anything missing, I'd say secrets. And I'm not talking about those health upgrade zones, but more like Easter eggs. I only know two things. One of them is in this part. You gotta turn the crank the other way around and then break this wall, which is supposed to unlock the original Prince of Persia game that you can later access from the main menu. Unfortunately, the PC version that I got from Uplay doesn't have this, or I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. The other thing is that once you start the game and you can move around on Farah's balcony, you can tap in a cheat code, which will take you to a secret level. The level resembles the original game, but with the mechanics of the Sands of Time. Not much to do here though. No enemies to fight, and it's just this one level. You can get to a room with a picture of the developers, and that's about it. When it comes to the level design, I do want to poke at the logic a bit from the narrative's perspective, like all the traps and machinery you witness. This mechanism is for activating the palace's defense system. Giant glowing sticks, a huge diamond reflecting light. I mean, it's awesome, but who the hell built all this shit? But never mind that. What kind of a psychopath puts deadly spinning razor blades inside the walls of a library, or spiky pits in a library? And what about these levers? Some of them are ridiculously high up. What's the job qualification? Being 3 meters tall? Yeah, I'm just having fun here. Obviously it's done for gameplay purposes, and that's totally fine. But here's something that's not fine. The part where the prince falls into the prison. Look at the shape of the hole and the walls around it in the cutscene. Now look at the same things in gameplay. It's completely different, and the hole is too far from the prince's location. In this case, he should have fallen to the bottom. So once you get out of the prison, you can go back to the initial drop zone, but now the hole is patched up. I understand why, but again, from the standpoint of the narrative, makes no sense. So what about the sound?
Good question.
Well, this is where certain cracks start to appear. The game definitely has a good soundtrack though. What I like about it is that it's not all just this boring Middle Eastern ambient shit. There's plenty of tracks that utilize rock which give the soundtrack more character, so the soundtrack gets a big plus from me. Now my biggest issue with the sound in general is the balance. Sometimes you can hear these weird hiccups. Sometimes the characters are loud.
The hourglass is nearby.
And in other moments you can barely hear what they're saying. Subtitles would have helped, and get used to hearing this sound. Playing this game with the default sound settings is kinda like navigating through a minefield, except sometimes you forget that you're standing on a minefield. For example, most times when you drink water, you get this melody. Even though you hear this a lot, you can still forget about it. So I had this moment where there was no music, just the sound of wind. I played with headphones on and I went to take a drink. With the default sound settings, the melody was so loud it scared the living shit out of me.
I thought you'd like it.
Of course you can always go and turn the music down from the settings, but then we have another problem. You can turn the music down for the gameplay, but you need to keep it up for the cutscenes because dialogue and sound effects options don't apply to the cutscenes. Here's an example. I turn off dialogue and sound effects. Now listen.
Highness, for your own safety, I suggest you flee.
Even though I turned off these two options, you could still hear the characters and sound effects. If I turn the music option down, then every sound aspect in the cutscene goes quieter, regardless of what these two options are. I don't know if this is present on the console versions as well, but this really sucks.
What sorcery is this?
Thankfully, the voice acting is pretty good though. Our main character is played by Yuri Lowenthal. You might know him as Spider-Man from the PlayStation 4 version. Yuri's voice fits perfectly to play a young prince, and what really helps along in bringing this character to life is the quality writing.
Live forever, and those I loved are dead and I to blame. I choose death.
The only thing that doesn't fit for a Prince of Persia, in my opinion, is this accent. What I mean is, for example, recently Warner Brothers released a new DC animated movie called Superman Red Son. It takes place in 1946 Soviet Union, so Superman grows up in Russia.
That the best you've got?
Now imagine if he had an American or a British accent in this film. It just wouldn't sound right, which is the case with this game, but this is more of a nitpick than actual criticism. The prince's accent doesn't necessarily hurt the game, and Yuri really does an amazing job.
Well, thank you, don't mention it.
Joanna Wasik, or Wasik, plays Farah.
Here I am.
For the most part, she's decent. Some of the line deliveries do feel a bit off at times, but she's not bad, and I'm not gonna comment on the accents anymore.
If this tomb is to be ours, at least the dagger will be buried with us. And we are together.
Barry Dennen voices the Vizier. Some of you might know him as Fat Man from Metal Gear Solid 2. Again, a good job done in playing the treacherous, sick main villain of the game. I only wish we could see more of this character.
Inside the hourglass is a marvel that no living man has seen.
The last thing I want to demonstrate are Farah's comments. Farah will react to many different actions that you do, like gasping when you make a dangerous jump.
Be careful!
If you put your sword away during a fight.
Why did you put your sword away?
Or when you rewind time.
That's strange. I almost feel as if I've lived this moment before.
Hell, she will even react when you just look at her long enough.
What are you looking at? Stop staring at me.
I wasn't looking at you.
Now details like these are damn cool, makes the characters a lot more believable. So, just like the other main aspects of this game, the presentation has some shortcomings as well, but in the end, it's still pretty solid.
But though I fight until the desert sands themselves were red with blood, I could not bring back the dead.
And that's my take on Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. My experience with this game after such a long time has showed me that in some way it can still hold its own. And how do I define that for myself? Well, by answering the question, did I have fun after all this time? Absolutely. Well, not with the combat, but make no mistake, this game is still good. The pros definitely outweigh the cons, and if you haven't played it, check it out. There's multiple reasons why it got so much praise when it was released in 2003, and for that time, this is absolutely groundbreaking work. Now, if you do plan to play this game on the PC, then there's a couple of things I gotta mention. First of all, I don't know about you, but for me, playing a game like this with a mouse and a keyboard is just ass. If you don't care, then knock yourself out, but for the rest of us, the game has a controller feature. The only problem is that this piece of shit didn't work for me. I tried every controller that I had and I got no response when trying to set up the buttons. So, I had to download the X Input program and link it up with the game. I don't know how this works, but through this, I got my controller functioning and I could finally play the game like a normal human being. Well, almost, because when I pushed the analog to the top left corner, then for some reason the prince kept walking, but in every other direction he was running. So then I had to go to the control panel and recalibrate the analog to be more sensitive in the top left corner. And after about 2 hours of fucking around with this, the controller was working like magic. But then, as I was playing the game, I kept noticing that the physics were all messed up. Sand particles going crazy, objects flying around, the prince's character bouncing at times, and the camera going fucking nuts. Well, it turned out that I was playing the game on 100 FPS. When you play an old game like this on such high FPS, the physics engine doesn't know what to do. It goes apeshit. So I lowered the FPS down to 30, and that fixed it.
You think you're cleverer than everybody, but you're just like the rest of them.
But still, I had problems with the in-game cutscenes. God damn it. They were constantly going out of sync, so to fix that, I had to go into some game file and change something. Yeah, I didn't do it. At that point, I said screw it. Enough is enough. However, by some miracle this issue got fixed as well, and I have no idea how this happened. What I'm trying to say is that I should have played the game on the console from the start. I mean, I have the fucking copy right here, but hopefully this information will save you hours of troubleshooting like I had to do. I bought it for the PC just for better visuals, and I wouldn't say that it was worth it after all this nonsense. So this video turned out way longer than I initially anticipated. If you actually made it to the end, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully, this time in less than 2 years.